The doors of the conclave hadn't been opened in 40 years. Commander Sarah Voss stood at the threshold, her hand pressed flat against the cold obsidian surface, feeling the vibration of raised voices on the other side. Alien voices. The Valkyrie Council had been arguing for 6 hours and 17 minutes. She knew because she'd been counting, standing perfectly still in her ceremonial armor while diplomats cycled in and out with pale faces and shaking hands. "They're going to vote to end the ceasefire," whispered Lieutenant Damien Cross, her second, positioned 2 steps behind her left shoulder. "I overheard the third envoy. The vote is in 40 minutes. Sarah didn't move. "I know. If they vote yes, I know, Damien." He fell silent. That was one of the things she valued most about him. He understood when words became weight. The war between humanity and the Valkyrie Dominion had lasted 11 years. Not a Cold War. Not a conflict of skirmishes and proxy battles. A war measured in burning colonies, in children evacuated in cargo holds, in casualty lists that scrolled for 6 pages in the morning briefings. Humanity had lost 400,000 people. The Valkyrie had lost more, though they never shared exact numbers, a cultural shame that ran deep in their biology. Admitting death tolls was, to them, the same as admitting weakness. The ceasefire had held for 8 months. 8 months of careful silence, of delegations and protocols and meetings that went nowhere. And, now, in this obsidian hall carved into the moon of a neutral world, the Valkyrie Council was deciding whether humanity still deserved to exist as a free species. Sarah had been assigned as the human military observer. A courtesy appointment. A symbolic gesture. She wasn't supposed to speak. She wasn't supposed to enter. She was supposed to stand outside the doors and represent, in silence, the humans who had earned the right to be present by not dying. The doors shuddered. She stepped back half a pace as they swung open from the inside. The Valkyrie who emerged was tall. They were always tall, nearly 3 meters, with pale blue skin that shifted color under stress. This one was green around the jaw, which Sarah had learned meant anger poorly concealed. He was a junior attaché, his rank marking still sharp and unweathered. He looked at her with 4 black eyes and said nothing. She looked back. He stepped aside. Behind him, through the open doors, she could see the council chamber in full chaos. 12 Valkyrie elders seated in a ring, their skin cycling through colors rapidly, blues, greens, flashes of red at the neck ridges, which meant real fury. Holographic battle maps floated above the central dais. Casualty counts.
Territorial luces.
Human colony coordinates, blinking like targets. And, in the center of the chamber, small and, alone on the diplomatic platform, was the human delegation. 3 people. A senior diplomat named Harlow, silver-haired and visibly exhausted. His 2 aides, both young, both doing their best not to look terrified. They were losing. Sarah could read the room in seconds. It was the same skill that had kept her alive in 3 combat deployments. Harlow's body language was defensive. His words, whatever they were, had stopped mattering. The council wasn't listening anymore. They were building consensus. They were building toward yes. The junior attaché looked at Sarah with something complicated in his expression. Not contempt. Not exactly. Something closer to curiosity. As if he expected her to beg. "Is there a protocol," she said quietly, "for a military observer to address the council directly?" He blinked. All 4 eyes, in sequence. There is a precedent. Under Section 12 of the Conclave Accords. If the civilian delegation fails, a military representative may submit a formal challenge to the vote. He paused. It has never been invoked. How long would it give us? 30 minutes. If the council agrees to hear the challenge. And, if they don't agree, then, you will have embarrassed your species in front of the Dominion's full council and triggered an immediate vote. Sarah looked past him into the chamber. Harlow had stopped speaking. One of the elders was raising her hand in the formal vote commencement gesture, slow, deliberate, the blue skin of her arm darkening toward violet. 30 seconds, maybe. Sarah looked back at the attaché. "Tell me one thing. Honestly. Is there anything Harlow could say in that room that would change a single vote?" The attaché held her gaze for a long moment. Then, he looked away. That was answer enough. Sarah straightened her shoulders, checked the latching of her armor at the collar. Old habit, something her first commanding officer had taught her, and walk through the open doors. The sound of the chamber hit her like a wall. The Valkyrie didn't shout. They modulated. Low resonant tones that layered over each other, building pressure in the air rather than volume. It felt like standing inside a thunderstorm. She crossed the outer ring in 12 steps, reached the edge of the diplomatic platform, and stepped up beside Harlow. He looked at her with an expression that moved through surprise, recognition, and dread in about 2 seconds. "Voss," he said under his breath, "you are not cleared to be in here." "Section 12, she said. His face went the color of old chalk. The elder who had begun the vote commencement gesture paused. Her arm lowered, slowly, as her attention shifted. Every eye in the chamber, 48 black eyes, plus the recorders and observers in the upper tiers, turned to Sarah. She did not look away from the elder at the head of the ring. "I am requesting the right to submit a military challenge to the vote," Sarah said, her voice steady and clear. The translator implanted her jaw, working the words into Valkyrie formal register. "Under the terms of the Conclave Accords, Section 12, Paragraph 3. I claim military standing. I request 30 minutes. The silence was absolute. Then, the elder at the head of the ring, the one they called the matriarch, the oldest living Valkyrie, whose skin had gone almost entirely white with age, turned her gaze on Sarah. And, slowly, without expression, she nodded. The 30 minutes began the moment Sarah stepped forward to the center dais. She had no notes, no prepared speech, no diplomatic framework that 8 months of negotiations had failed to build. What she had was 11 years of war inside her body, 3 deployments that had turned her hair silver at 34, and a memory she'd spent a long time trying to put somewhere she couldn't reach it. She was going to reach for it now. "I was at Kepler Station," she said. The room shifted. Subtle, a change in the resonance of the ambient tones, a cooling of colors. The elder aides at the outer ring glanced at each other. Kepler Station. 4 years ago. The battle that had no official name in human records, because naming it would have required admitting what happened there. A Valkyrie assault fleet had arrived without warning during a civilian evacuation. 6,000 people. 2/3 of them children. The station's defense grid had failed in the first exchange. The Valkyrie didn't know a human officer had survived it. "I commanded the rear guard," Sarah said. "We held the docking ring for 9 hours while the evacuation ships completed loading. My unit was 17 people. We lost 11. She let that sit for a moment. Not for effect, she wasn't performing. She was making sure her voice would stay level for the next part. When the assault commander boarded the station, when his forces came through the east corridor, I was ready to fight. I was going to fight, because that's the only calculation I knew how to make." She paused. He stopped. The room was very still. His forces stopped. He came forward alone, into a corridor where I had 4 wounded soldiers and a barricade made of equipment lockers, and he stopped 10 meters away and he stood there. She looked at the matriarch. I didn't understand it. I thought it was a tactic. I kept my weapon up. She reached into the inner pocket of her armor. The guards along the wall tensed. She saw them shift, saw hands move toward weapons. She moved slowly, deliberately, and withdrew a single object. A comm chip. Small. Matte gray. She set it on the dais. His name was Subcommander Valtarith. He had received word, during the assault, that the station's population registry had been updated. He knew what was on the evacuation ships. He stopped his assault. He held his forces in position for 4 hours while the last ship finished loading and cleared the station's gravity well. She looked around the ring. He was court-martialed when he returned. I learned that later. He was stripped of rank and removed from active command for deviating from orders. She touched the comm chip. He sent me this message afterward. Through a neutral relay. It took 2 years to reach me. She looked up. He said, I cannot explain what I did in terms my commanders will accept. But I know what was on those ships. And I know that there will come a time when we must decide what we are fighting for, and what we are not. The silence had weight now. Physical weight. I am not here to tell you humanity is innocent, Sarah said. We are not. I'm not. I have done things in this war that I don't speak about, and some of them were wrong, and I carry them. Her voice was level. It cost her. But I am here to tell you that Veltareth made a choice in that corridor that changed what I believe is possible between our species. And I am asking you, not as a diplomat, not as a military representative, but as a person who stood in that corridor, to make the same kind of choice. She stepped back from the dais. I am done. The matriarch had not moved through any of it. Her pale skin had not shifted color. Her expression had not changed. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the elder to the matriarch's left, a broad-shouldered counselor whose neck ridges had been flushing red since before Sarah had entered, leaned back in his seat. The red faded. Not to neutral. To something cooler. Something that, in the reading Sarah had spent 8 months studying, corresponded to a word that translated roughly as reckoning. He looked at the matriarch. She looked at Sarah. Where is Veltareth now? She asked. Her voice was low and resonant, the formal register carrying clearly across the chamber. Sarah met her gaze. I don't know. I've been trying to find out. Something moved across the matriarch's face. Not softness. She wasn't a creature built for softness. But something adjacent to it. Something like recognition. We will recess, the matriarch said. The recess lasted 2 hours. Sarah stood outside the chamber doors again, back in her original position, armor still latched, posture still correct. Damien stood behind her left shoulder and said nothing, and she was grateful for every second of his silence. Harlow came to stand beside her after the first hour. He didn't speak immediately. He was a diplomat. He understood that some silences needed to complete themselves. Veltareth is alive, he said finally. My aides found the records. He was reinstated to a civilian advisory post 14 months ago. He's been assigned to a Valkyrie resettlement project on the border worlds. He paused. He has a family. Sarah absorbed that. The council is going to vote, Harlow continued. Whatever happens, it happens in there, and there's nothing more either of us can do. I know. What you did in there, he stopped. Started again. It wasn't protocol.
No.
It might have made things worse. It might have. He was quiet for a moment. Then, quietly, it was the right thing. She didn't answer. She wasn't sure she was the right person to make that judgment. The doors opened at the 2-hour mark. The junior attaché appeared in the gap. His skin was cycling through colors she hadn't seen before, a deep, layered blue that shifted at the edges to something almost silver. She didn't have a reading for it. She'd run out of her reference points. The council has voted, he said.
Sera straightened.
Damien's breath stilled behind her. The vote on ceasefire termination has been withdrawn, the attaché said. The matriarch has proposed a new framework, a joint commission, to be formed within 90 days, to investigate the events of Kepler Station and establish accountability protocols for both sides. He paused, and, in his voice was something that was not quite emotion but was adjacent to it, in the same way the matriarch's expression had been adjacent to recognition. The vote on the commission passed. 11-1. Sarah let out a slow breath. 1 abstention. Damien asked softly. The attaché glanced at him. 1 abstention. The councillor who abstained submitted a statement. He said he needed more time to decide what he was fighting for, and what he was not. He held Sarah's gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then, he stepped back, and the doors remained open in a way they hadn't been in 40 years, letting the light from inside the chamber fall across the threshold in a long, unbroken line. Sarah stood at the edge of it. She didn't step forward. She didn't need to. The light was enough. In her inner pocket, the comm chip pressed cool and small against her ribs, and she thought of a Valkyrie officer standing alone in a corridor with his forces behind him and a barricade ahead of him, making a choice that his commanders would never understand and that had taken 4 years to reach her and that had, tonight, in a chamber she had never been cleared to enter, finally, landed where it was meant to go. The war was not over. But the vote that would have ended all chances of peace had been withdrawn. And, in the silence between what could have happened and what had, Sarah Voss stood at the threshold of something that did not yet have a name, and let herself believe, just barely, just enough, that it might become 1.2 or 2.